for the book report. I want to start there because your book report is due this Sunday. So let's see if we can actually get this done out of the way. That way I can give you the prompt for the final paper. And I think what I've decided to do is that I'm not going to make you do any more discussion board posts, so that it gives you some wiggle room to want to work on the final paper and finish up the semester. I've been thinking a lot about just the ethics of teaching in like year 3 of a pandemic with everything that's going on. And I see my colleagues, your other professors are very burnt out. Staff is burnt out, and I see you all burnt out. So, and I'm like, I've really been thinking about how does the class have to be hard in order to be challenging and effective? And I don't think that is the case. So we'll go from there. So we'll go from there. And this, I do this with all the papers I assign. I like to be very clear about the prompt. So that's where I want to go today. Look, let me share the screen. Look at the prompt so that I am clear about it. It's still going to be challenging because this is one of the hardest kinds of assignments I ever give students, because I'm asking you to read somebody else's work and then give your take on it. As students, we're not trained to do that. We're trained to absorb information, right? In history, we try to not make you memorize information. We try to help you have you make connections. This is different though. It's not, you should be making connections, but you also have to take on the role of a scholar, right? Who has the power and the ability to analyze somebody else's work. Somebody who has more degrees than you, potentially. Somebody who you might think is more qualified on the topics. And it doesn't matter because you still have to do this, right? You still have to judge their work. And this is where I'm like, okay, I might be nobody to criticize Jack Kerouac, but it doesn't matter. Jack Kerouac wrote a book that's now in the public, belongs to the public, and everybody has a right to react to it and to have their take on it. Same thing with all the books you have all chosen, right? So that's what I'm asking you to do here, right? So how you do that though, how you do that when you've never seen it done, or you need an example. I'm going to give you here a couple of examples. So these are both examples that come from students from a totally different class, have on a totally different reading, right? But I wanted to give you this so that you can see both good and bad examples. So I'm going to tell you that one of these sentences would not work as a thesis for this paper. And the other one, though, would work great. Right? It's a great thesis. Right? So let me read to you the two sentences, and then we can take a vote to see which one you think is the good sentence, the good thesis, and which you think is the bad thesis. So the first sentence here is, Mellors has a very effective argument because she depicts the personal experience of men and women. However, she could have used more statistics to strengthen her argument. Second sentence, Sarah Mellors argues that birth control in 1950s China varied vastly based on class, education, and location. So, okay, with raise of your hands, who thinks the first sentence is the better thesis? Brian, one person? Just one person thinks the first. Okay. Who thinks the second sentence is the better thesis? You are all wrong. You are all wrong. Looking at these two sentences, for a thesis, for this prompt, the first one is better. Now, let's talk about why. because I think I see what you all see. The second sentence is a better sentence. Right? What do you all like about the second one? What makes it a good sentence?
It gets straight
Well,
to the
she's giving
point.
you her argument. It's outlined clearly in the sentence.
It's Alan clearly. Who said, what was the other comment I heard?
They get straight to the point.
It's straight to the point. The argument, if by reading the sentence, you know exactly what the author argues. It's clear, precise. Jasmine saying in the chat, the first sentence critiques the author. Yes, the second sentence is clear. It's clear about the reading. I assigned a reading from an author, historian Sarah Mellers. The second sentence tells you what the argument the author made, but the second sentence doesn't make an argument itself, right? It just summarizes the reading. That's the problem with the second sentence. It summarizes the reading really well in one sentence. It's clear. If I don't, I'm never gonna, you guys are never gonna see this reading, but by reading that sentence, you now know what that reading is about. But I don't care what the reading is about, sort of. I care what you think about the reading. Right? And as an argument then, this student, the first sentence, even though it's not a great sentence or it's not the perfect sentence, it tells me what the student thinks about the reading. Right? So a couple of tips here. One of the things that made this a good thesis for me as the one person grading this is, the word effective. Right? That is one of the things that you can use in your thesis for the book report paper. Is the author effective? So this has nothing to do with, is the book good? Is the book bad? Or is the argument good or bad? Good and bad don't really matter. Those words are too general, right? To make your language, the way you talk about the book more academic, you can talk about how effective the author is, how effective what they do in the book is. Right? And then why is it effective, right? So this student is telling me that the argument was effective because of the personal experiences that are included in the reading. And yeah, that in that reading, the author interviewed people in China, and she uses those interviews throughout the article. So those are the good elements in that reading. But then a student is also telling me that still, even though the author did an effective job with the personal experiences, that there was something they could have done better, right? That they could have included more statistics, more numbers to strengthen the argument. That's debatable, right? That's debatable. And that makes the sentence a clear argument, right? It doesn't summarize somebody else. It gives me the student's take on the reading. And that's what I want from you all, right? So this thesis here, right, is a student who found something to highlight that the reading did well and something to criticize on it, right? So this is the, you can work with the wording, some of you are better writers and can make the sentence better, but something like that would work perfectly for this assignment. But it doesn't have to have that same structure. So these two sentences are both good. I'm going to just straight out tell you both of them are good. Both of them, these were submitted by two different students on a totally different reading. And I highlighted the thesis and I wrote good for both of them, good thesis. Neither one of these students lost points because of the thesis. So let me read you the first one. This one says, while Pavard makes a compelling and well-informed argument with an abundance of evidentiary support, she could strengthen her argument by providing broader definitions of term. That should have an S at the end. It should say terms. Yep. terms. That was not the student's problem. That was my transcription problem. So this one is a good one because it does kind of a similar thing as the previous good sentence. It chooses to to complement something in the reading, but it also criticizes an aspect of the reading, right? But picks different things, right? It says it makes a compelling, well-informed argument, right? And provides a lot of evidence. You don't have to use terms like this, by the way, evidentiary support. You can just say evidence. But the student also said, but the argument could be stronger if there were better definitions, right? And that, so you can criticize something in a book as simple as that. Like literally they could have just given better definitions. Could have had a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, and it would have been even stronger. Right? But very basic. I'm like, if you're having a really hard time coming up with a thesis statement for your paper, I want to show you a really basic thesis. That's not great, but it works. It works. This one says, Pavard is successful in arguing that information on contraception should not be hidden or shamed and should be well known because that information is valuable. This is one way of turning a bad thesis into a good one. This sentence summarizes what the argument in the reading was, right? Pavard is successful in arguing that information on contraception should not be hidden or shamed and should be well known because the information is valuable. That summarizes the argument in the book or in the reading. What makes this a good thesis is really one word. One word in this sentence makes it an argument rather than a summary. Can anybody identify the one word that makes this sentence good? Or at least work? Valuable. Not in the successful in arguing that information on contraception should not be hidden or shamed, should be well known because the information is valuable. So it actually is good that the author, that the student included that word, but that's not the key word actually. Value is not the key word in the sentence that makes it a thesis rather than an observation. It does include opinion. It is a sentence that includes opinion, but it's not the word I'm looking for. Successful. Yeah, Rory, it's the word successful for me. That tells me the student liked the argument. They thought it was a good argument, right? Without saying, I liked the argument, the student is telling me this was a good argument. So if you want to include, the argument your author gave in the book, include it in the thesis, but you need to give me your take on it. And sometimes just adding one word to saying successful is enough to give me your take. What I can expect from this sentence is that the entire paper is going to be about all the good things the author did in the reading. They're not going to criticize it at all. They're just going to give me good things. And that's fine. You're allowed to like the book you chose. The book can be brilliant. However, you're also allowed to hate the book or to think the book just didn't work. So you could always say something like Pavard is not successful in arguing. Right. So I'm not saying you have to use the word successful, right? The sentence right before this one, the first one over here, does not use the word successful, right? There's nowhere in here is the word successful. But if you want to check that you're doing more than just summarizing an argument, maybe you want to use that word. Does that give you a little bit better idea of what I'm looking for? A little bit. I'm like, I want your take. I want to know if this book you read works, if it doesn't work, what works in the book, what doesn't work in the book. Now let's try to do that with a book we've all read, Caste. Right? No one's writing their book report on Caste. So let's see if we can't, it can come up with a similar thing, a thesis. Let's say we were writing our book report using Caste. Let me stop sharing and go back to the, I'm going to use the whiteboard on this one, I think. Maybe. No, hold on. I need to pick what I'm going to do with this first. Okay, there we go. Okay, so tell me, how do you all feel about Caste? You think Caste, do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's a successful book, a not successful book? Give me your thoughts. Then I'm going to put some of them here. We're just brainstorming. This is what I would suggest doing before you start writing. What are your thoughts on the word, on the book Caste, if I could spell it correctly? Oh, wow, I didn't even spell her name correctly. I really failed this time. Okay. Okay, no, seriously, I need your thoughts on the book Caste. I know some of you really liked it, so why don't we start there? What are some of the good things in Caste, in that reading? Ricardo says the book provides a successful argument. Ricardo just wrote the thesis. The book provides a successful argument that the United States with its use of evidence. Okay, Ricardo thinks that it's a successful argument and that it uses good evidence. Okay, so that's what we're going to put. That's what I'm taking for yours, Ricardo, right now. That Wilkerson provides good evidence. Let me come back to everybody in a second. Goodness gracious. Evidence, when I'm juggling too many different screens. Mary says the start, it's the shocking book because it starts off with a lot of information, like bad info, but good to know. Oh, bad info, like bad things people have done. Okay, the shocking elements. That works. When you compare, for one example of that is the comparison to the Nazis. Comparing the US to the Nazis is a kind of shock element that for some readers, it works really well. Let's see. Olavo says, I like it because it made a track from a history to different classes. Okay, so that goes into good use of evidence, right? That it uses examples from history, right? It particularly India and Nazi Germany, right? Let's see, Ricardo says, but a critique is the type of evidence. For example, why not use the Spanish casta system? That is an excellent critique, Ricardo. Let me come back to the critiques. Let me see what Rory says. Rory says, what I liked most about the book was the different ways in which caste systems have been used in various places around the world and how those different places have all influenced some ways the caste system in the United States. Okay, so that speaks to the use of evidence really well. So I love everything you're all saying here, because these are some of the things that we can say, we can argue Wilkerson does really well in Caste. Some of the use of evidence just really works, right? The use of different examples really works for some of you. Right, for some of you, even the Nazi element, which tends to be overused, right? The Nazis can be very overused sometimes. But if somebody doesn't know the way in which the Nazis looked to the US to build their system, then reading it in Wilkerson's book is going to be this moment of revelation, right? If you didn't know about that, it's really great that you know it, right? But then a critique, whoop, let me write it in the right box. Ricardo had a good critique of it, which is there were actually other examples in history that would have worked even better, right? The Spanish caste system that they used in the Americas is an intricate hierarchical system because they had to deal with like, okay, so if whiteness is at the top, blackness is at the bottom, what do you do with indigenous people? Well, okay, you put them here. Now, what do you do with people who are mixed Spanish and indigenous? What do you do with people that are mixed white and black? What do you do with people that are mixed with indigenous and black? What if people have only one grandparent that is black, one grandparent that is indigenous, and one grandparent that is Spanish? Like, they thought about it in a lot of detail and put everybody in a hierarchy. So Ricardo actually has a good critique of it, saying like, wait a minute, the way she talks about caste, why not include the Spanish? Right? That would have been actually a good point of references for it. Although Ricardo's being very clear, what I didn't enjoy as much was the input of Wilkerson's own experiences. Who enjoyed it? Who enjoyed her personal experiences? Like, and we can totally disagree about that. For some people, it actually it brings a lot of insight when an academic brings in their experience and the process, right? When she talks about going to a conference and meeting up with somebody, those experiences for some readers, they work better. For others, total turnoff, right? So that is totally fair. You can put that one in either category and it would work as a great argument, right? Let's see. What did I miss about somebody else? Oh, make it more personal, but not too much. Okay, that's another thing that you can criticize the degree to which somebody does something. Maybe, okay, for example, for me with caste, the Nazi example, I thought worked well at the beginning of the book. When she makes the comparison and the discussion about eugenics and about how the Nazis actually thought that the American system was too extreme, that worked for me at the beginning. The Nazi example at the end, I thought was way like, no. I thought for me, the Nazi examples at the end of the book did not work. I thought it was too much. So something like that, criticizing that an author uses something too much you can use that. Ricardo says, I enjoyed some parts of her sharing her personal experience, but in some chapters didn't. Yeah, okay. So in some it worked and in some it did not. And that, again, that goes to the degree to which an author does something. So that would be a perfect thing to form a thesis around, right? Around that element. Yeah. So then let me, and anything else anybody wants to, any other critiques of Wilkerson? Yeah, Albert?
Well, for me, Professor, it was easy reading. It's very well. The problem that I have with this type of books is that they offer examples, but it's dangerous because, in a sense, people who don't really know the history of one thing will take it on face value and not really examine the facts outside the context where it's actually written. And there could be some misunderstandings or misinformation being extracted from it.
Yes, yes. There were several times in which Wilkerson makes generalizations, She just discusses generally something, and it can be too general at times. And there's where the example you pick of her writing can matter, right? One that jumped out to me really clearly towards the end of the book is when she talks about the healthcare system in Europe. The way she discusses the healthcare in Europe is so vastly general, to the point where, like, she talks about it like there's no, like, almost like Europe does not have a race issue when it comes to a healthcare system. And that's just not true. Like, that's just not true. But using Europe as an example to criticize the American healthcare system that gets done a lot. So I can understand why she's using it. I can understand why she's talking about it even in general terms. But I know more about the European healthcare system, and I would agree with her that it's way better than ours. But the way she discusses it is almost like making Europe sound like they have no race issues. And I was like, well, that's not true. I happen to know that there's a lot of racial and issues of racism in Europe. So things like that, fair to criticize. Somebody else said something. Let's see what else. The structure. Olavo said, like, the eighth pillar that doesn't have enough information. Okay. And see, and you can even include something like that in a thesis. And then what your body paragraph, you would have one body paragraph discussing that chapter and the fact that there is not enough information there. Yeah. So each of these points, by the way, you would have to pick, right? If I were having you write your paper on CAST, I would have you pick what points you want to focus on. Then you would put that in a thesis statement. And then each body paragraph would go into more detail, right? So if I'm forming a thesis statement based on what we have here, we could say something like, in CAST, so you are allowed to use the title of the book. And usually when you use the name of the author, the first time you use the name of the author, you should use the complete name. After that, you can just use the last name, right? Some of you get a little too familiar with the authors and like to use their first names, but ideally you want to use their last names. So in CAST by Isabel Wilkerson. How would I put it? She successfully, since I like that word, I'm going to put it successfully argues that the United States has a caste system by making comparisons to India and Nazi Germany. But misses important points of comparison and overgeneralizes at times. So something like this would encompass, I hit on almost everything that you all brought up in here. The thesis doesn't have to include absolutely everything, but it should capture the main themes that your paper is going to discuss. So from here, right, then what I would expect would be one paragraph on the argument and the comparisons. Well, maybe just on one paragraph on the argument, maybe one paragraph on the India and not see examples. Right? Maybe 2 paragraphs on that actually. 1 paragraph on missing the Spanish, if you were to include that. And then at least 1 paragraph on kind of generalizations or things she gets wrong. And even in a paper like this, you could even have 1 paragraph at the, especially towards the end, on like just the style of writing. Right? I'm talking about, for example, how it's easy to read. She doesn't use a ton of jargon, right? In her book, I don't think she ever uses the word hegemony, which she could have used everywhere. She could have used the word hegemony. She could have used a bunch of other highly academic words, right, that are common in the field, but she didn't, because her audience is a white audience. She's writing for the general public. Right? And does that well, right? Because she's writing for the general public and not for other academics. She doesn't use a lot of jargon, and that works. That generally works, right? So something like this is what you need to sit down and do with your book. Right? You need to sit down and even do columns, right? What did the book do well? What are some of the things that you can critique about the book? I think it's easier to write about a book if you can find one thing to critique about it. But like I said earlier, you don't have to. If everything in the book was just really well done, then it was really well done. Right? That's it. Then you just have to focus on what did they do well, right? So for example, all right, what is it about the India example that really works? Well, she gets the word caste out of the India example, right? She uses the word because that's the word we use to talk about India. And so in that way, it's really easy to make a 1-1 comparison between the US and India, right? She talks about how there are untouchables, right? People at the bottom of the caste system, and she compares it to the treatment of Black people in the US. And that comparison really works, right? And then she talks about the way people at the top of the caste system talk to people at the bottom of the caste system in India, compares it to the way white people talk about Black people and give specific examples. And that helps us being able to understand the US as a caste system, right? So that's what you would write in your paragraph, right? Or something like along those lines. So you would just, the paragraph would get into specifics. It would use quotes from the book. And the key in the body paragraphs is to make sure that enough of your voice is there, right? Enough of your voice. Sometimes, and this happened in the Malcolm X paper, so a lot of you like were so wrapped up in what Malcolm X was saying in the autobiography or what was happening in Malcolm's life that you forgot to include your voice, your take on it. Right? One way to include that, one way to make sure your voice is there is if you can talk about like making connections to today, right? If depending on your book, some of you for the book, it might work, some of you might not, but for some of you talking about how, you know, how it speaks to the audience, for example, right? So making a connection to, I don't know, something that's happening today, the discussion of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, to a discussion of voting rights. If you can connect it to some discussion, some political fight that's happening right now, that is one way of making sure your voice is there in every paragraph. It doesn't have to be that, but that's one way of doing it. Because I did notice in the Malcolm X papers that a lot of you, actually almost all of you, were holding back a lot of like your own thoughts, right? In your politics. And maybe part of it was because the elements of Malcolm X's life were so compelling, but I don't need you to do that, right? These are argumentative papers where you're making an argument. You just, you talk about it in a way that is formal, right? You're not going to say, oh, well, these people all suck because of this, this, and that. No, you say the author forgot to include a valid criticism on X, Y, or Z. Right? It's all in the wording, the way you include your own thoughts and sometimes your own politics. And it's your own politics that allow you to see when an author missed something. Right? When they miss something, right? They're so wrapped up in their own politics, the author is, that they might forget to view it from a different point of view. Right? Sometimes an author is completely one-sided in their book, and they might be upfront about it. They might tell you, yeah, this is one-sided, right? They might say, hey, if you are a religious person, you're going to hate my book. Or if you're an atheist, you're going to hate my book. And still, it's fair to criticize them for that, for failing to take into consideration that missing point of view. Is they're like, I would have actually really strengthened your argument or your book if you had taken into consideration a little bit of a counter argument. Yeah, and Mary says, for me, it's really hard to write, not use I. Okay, then write I. Use I, Mary, all the time, everywhere, in every sentence. But then try to see when you go back and edit it, give yourself time to edit. And Jonathan, I see your message, but go back and edit and see if you can just take out a few of the I's. So my take on writing I in academic papers, it used to be that, like, I was taught never use I in a history paper, never. But I've seen a lot of trained historians use I in their papers, in published work. So I no longer tell students that they can't use I. I tell them use it, but don't overuse it. Use it effectively where it makes sense to use it, but not every sentence should be I. And usually if you can just literally delete that phrase and the sentence works, then you should delete it. Right? That does mean, though, giving yourself time to edit it. Yeah, and especially if you're including your own experience, like if you're gonna use your own experience to talk about something, to criticize or to praise something in the book, you're gonna use I. You're going to use that. And that's fair. That's totally fair if you're going to use something in your personal life, right? Especially if the author uses their personal life, right? They've invited that conversation. It's very relevant to bring in your own experiences. Yeah. Do you all feel a little bit better, or is it panic mode? I'm like, I don't want any panic modes, but if we have any panic modes, what I want to do is cancel class on Wednesday so that I don't have any new material for you all on Wednesday. If anybody needs that time to sit down and brainstorm your paper or to work on it, you can use it. Or if you need help brainstorming, if you're like, I chose this book and now I have no clue what I'm going to do, I don't have time to pick a different book, come talk to me. This is where, like, just getting creative with it is, I can help you figure out what to write. Yeah, Deborah?
Yeah, I was going to try to wait till like after class, but I'm reading Eldridge Cleaver, and it's from a man's perspective, and I'm finding him very difficult to read. He calls himself a serial rapist. I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
So have you picked up the book at all? I don't know what his thesis statement is. He makes a statement about. I know everybody doesn't want to hear this, and I was going to wait till after class, but
No,
we
no,
can talk about it.
this
He
is
makes a statement about African American men being being in prison. I don't know what his thesis statement is. He makes a lot of examples about the white woman and the black male dichotomy. He talks about the system, about the prison system. It's just his memoirs about his days spent in prison.
Okay.
So what do I write about? I don't know where to start.
One, you say that by focusing so much on maybe these prison experience, he does ends up not giving a message, not sending a message to his audience. And on top of it, his discussion of sexual assault prevents a reader from fully enjoying this book. It distracts from everything else he says when he brings you out of the reading by talking about sexual assault like it's a normal situation. That you make that your thesis. You say by including that, he completely just he took you out of the reading and made it impossible to make this book readable. And you say that. You say a modern reader is going to be taken out of his story when he talks about sexual assault this casually. Like they make that your thesis, and then the rest the sort of paper you criticize it, because even we can give people the benefit of the doubt of like, okay, well, in the time period this was widely accepted. It's like, yes, but it also has implications for how people are viewed, right? Especially for Black men. If he's talking about Black men as always being in prison, and he's using himself as an example of somebody who's committing sexual assault, he's just feeding stereotypes too. So it's fair to criticize that and say like, okay, that attitude was common at the time, but also he should have known better. And a modern audience is not going to like it. So maybe somebody at the time would have liked, people at the time might have liked it, but us right now, no. And women, a woman reading it, whatever time period, is not gonna like somebody's story if it's constantly bringing up sex.
Yeah, I don't think women would too much care for the book, because he talks about sexual assault on white and Black women.
Yeah.
Or how he spent a number of years sexually assaulting women. And it threw me for a loop. I didn't know how to react to it. Where do I take my stand? I'm not a man. I don't know what's going on in his head. I didn't know what words to come up with to describe his description or his explanation. I'm a woman. I don't want to be sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, had you read the book, could you come up with a thesis?
Yeah, no, but you can criticize it. Honestly, if you don't find a thesis, the book doesn't have a thesis. You all are smart people. If you can't figure out a thesis, the book doesn't have a thesis. And it's fair to say, maybe this story would have worked if he would have been more focused, if he had focused on a message and made an argument. And also not been so sexist and discuss sexual assault all the time.
Yeah, he's sexist. Yes, he really is. He really is.
Yeah, a lot of you.
All the stereotypes that you hear about African American men.
Then use that, right? One paragraph talking about feeding stereotypes. One paragraph talking about how his audience is clearly not women because of the way he discusses sexual assault.
Okay.
Right, and it's all clearly like he views it as acceptable, and he's assuming that his audience is all men, when in reality anybody can pick a book up. Right, and if you're writing a book, presumably you want to sell a book. So it doesn't mean you have to speak to everybody, but listen, if you're writing for men and women read your book, they can criticize it. Once you put a work of, all of your authors, once they've put their book out into the public, then people will read it, and the reception will be varied. They can't control that. It's fair. More than fair because I'm forcing you to do it. Just like with Malcolm X, right? There are things in Malcolm X's autobiography and in his life and in his message that we all liked. But most of us can also identify the sexism in his own story and in his own thinking. Right? Like, I think that is fair and required when we are studying somebody and somebody's life and somebody's thoughts and arguments and teachings. Yeah. Any other things that jump out? I'm like, so it's hard sometimes to criticize somebody's life because then you feel like it's very personal. But remember that you're criticizing a book, what somebody put in a book, right? So ultimately, it's not every aspect of somebody's life. Ultimately, it's a criticism of the final product that was published. So actually, at some point, hopefully, one of the things that I will see in most people's papers is that discussion of audience, like, who is this book for? Right? Maybe you liked it, but you're like, yeah, I liked it, but I don't think any woman will like it. Or I don't think any gay person will like it because it includes this and that. And that's also fair to say, hey, I liked it, but I can see how somebody else would not enjoy that aspect of it. Or I hated it, but if you're a man and you don't care about these just open discussions of these things, then maybe you will like it. And you're a terrible person if you do, but you will like it. Yeah. I'm like, this is why I wanted to have this discussion with you all, because some of your books are tricky. Like some of your books are tricky. Others of you, the book is straightforward, right? Another thing that came up in the discussions with people at office hours was, if you haven't finished the book, I think that you can still write this paper without having read every single page, every single word in the book, right? And it's fair to say that a book was boring, that a writer did not accomplish. If he's not capturing the audience's attention, then that's a fair critique as well. Right? And that might make it very difficult to finish the book. So in which case, if it's an academic book, then you want to skim some parts of it and make sure you have enough to say. But there you have to be strategic in your skimming, and that is okay. In fact, that is often what we do with academic work. Unless it's your field of specialty, you want to hear somebody else's argument, but you don't need to read every piece of evidence, every example they give. I do it all the time. Or when I'm reading something where like I already know all the background on a topic and they're spending, pages and pages giving the historical background on a topic. And I'm like, I can totally skip it because I know exactly what they're saying in these paragraphs. Skim, skim, skim. Any other questions or concerns? No? Well, there went the whole class. And I wanted to start with this because I wanted to make sure we talked about this. And I don't feel comfortable starting a discussion on a totally new topic. I was going to talk about the Chicano movement. I was going to give you a general background. So why don't I leave that off for next week? That way, everything in your head right now is your book. Right, finishing this report. You can use the Life Happens class, or if you end up needing even more time than that, then we can have a discussion about that. But I'll go ahead and stop the recording.